Many years ago, I first heard about Medusa. I was still young and curious, and the story was told to me by an old fisherman while the waves crashed against the stones of the shore. He spoke of something beyond legends, something much more real, something he swore he had seen with his own eyes. He told me that Medusa was not just a made-up story to scare children, but a real creature, a supernatural force that still roamed the world. According to the fisherman, Medusa was not just a woman with snakes in her hair, as many imagined, but an ancient entity whose origin was lost in the mists of time. He said she was a fearless goddess, punished by the gods of Olympus and transformed into a monster who carried in her eyes the power to petrify any living being. However, contrary to what many believed, she was not cruel by nature. Her transformation into a creature of terror was the result of a curse imposed by forces greater than herself. That night, the old fisherman recounted how, years before, during a fierce storm, he had gotten lost at sea and spotted a monstrous figure in the murky waters, with eyes glowing like two spheres of fire. He swore he saw the reflection of the snakes writhing, as if the very essence of terror was there, on the brink of death. He said that, at that moment, he felt a fear he could never forget, but also a strange compassion for Medusa. The creature, seemingly solitary and lost, seemed more like a victim of fate than a threat. As the fisherman told his story, I felt something stir within me, something that went beyond mere fascination with legends and myths. He told me how Medusa had been forgotten by many, but still remained somewhere, waiting to be remembered, to be recognized. And although I had doubts about the truth of what he said, something told me that, somewhere distant, in the depths of the world or in the shadow of a dream, Medusa still lived. A legend or a truth, the story marked me forever, and the image of that mythical creature never left my mind. Even today, when I look at the sea, sometimes I imagine that, among the waves and winds, Medusa is still watching, and with every lost gaze, with every snake that moves in the waters, a part of me wonders, was the legend really just a story? Or does she live, solitary, waiting for the moment to return? Medusa was not just a woman with snakes in place of her hair, as everyone thinks. She was a force of evil, a living vengeance with a gaze capable of petrifying anyone who dared to look her in the eye. Her existence, far from the simple children's legends, was marked by a deep betrayal and ancient pain, which manifested in every one of her movements, in every snake that writhed with fury on her head. Medusa's monstrous appearance was no mere coincidence. It was a reflection of the suffering she carried, a cruel punishment that had transformed her into a feared figure, a being whose only company were the creatures slithering on her forehead and the solitude that surrounded her like a heavy cloak. The old fisherman, with eyes clouded by age and sea salt, spoke with a certainty that sent shivers down my spine. He told of a lost temple, hidden in the heart of a forgotten island, a place where Medusa still took refuge, far from human eyes, waiting for chance or folly to bring someone who would try to challenge her fury. He said that this island, shrouded in mysteries and surrounded by treacherous seas, had been forgotten by men and even by the gods. The island seemed alive, pulsing like an extension of Medusa herself, with its stones and trees marked by a primal and cruel force. There, the temple remained hidden, covered by vegetation and time, waiting for someone, in their senseless quest, to dare cross the boundaries of the forbidden land. And according to him, many had already tried. Brave men, adventurers in search of wealth or glory, and even those who sought to challenge the myth, believing they could tame the beast. But in every case, their fate had been sealed long before they reached the temple. None of them returned to tell the story. The fisherman spoke in a grave tone, almost as if his words were a warning, an echo of a tragedy that had repeated itself since time immemorial. He said that Medusa's gaze was not just a curse, it was an uncontrollable force, something beyond human understanding, capable of absorbing not only life, but the very essence of anyone who dared to face her. It was not about immediate death, but a painful process, where the victim lost all of their humanity, turned to stone, as a warning for those who came afterward, an eternal reminder of the power of vengeance and evil. The fisherman's story deeply marked me, more than any tale or legend I had ever heard. Something in that narrative seemed palpable, almost real. as if Medusa were more than a distant myth. She could be there, on the island, waiting for the one who would challenge her home. And as I listened to his words, I felt a shiver down my spine, as if the fate of all those who had ventured there was still alive, petrified in the stones surrounding the forgotten temple. The island, the temple, Medusa. They were all among the shadows of the world, waiting for the next to get lost, waiting for the next story without return. I was foolish enough to doubt the old man's words. The story he told me seemed just another exaggerated legend, a tale created to scare the unwary. The fisherman, with his tired eyes and hoarse voice, spoke as if he knew more than he was willing to share. But I, young and impulsive, didn't give proper attention to the gravity of his words. However, something that night made my confidence waver. The wind was stronger, and the tide higher. The waves crashed with a dull roar against the rocks, as if the sea was trying to warn me, but I was determined to ignore any omen. As I walked along the beach, a strange sensation began to take over me. The darkness seemed thicker, more impenetrable, and the sound of the waves seemed muffled, as if something was altering the very rhythm of the environment. I could swear there was something else in the salty breeze, something that didn't come just from the sea. A whisper, a hiss so soft it could have been only the sound of the wind, but in some deep part of my mind, it made my heart race. It was as if snakes were moving in the shadows, silently slithering, watching every step I took. I looked around, but all I saw were the rocks and the dark vegetation dancing under the pale light of the moon. But the feeling persisted, an invisible presence that seemed to encircle me, studying me. I was no longer alone on that beach. Something, or someone, was there, watching me from the shadows, waiting. And then, as if an invisible force had decided to test me, a cutting wind suddenly blew, carrying with it a strong and strange scent, as if it were the fragrance of something ancient, distant, lost. It was then that I felt the weight of those words, those warnings about Medusa, which until then had seemed like nothing more than exaggerations from a crazy old man. I decided that the next day I would investigate on my own. Perhaps it was just my imagination, or maybe I was being influenced by the story the fisherman had told me, but the sensation was undeniable. That place, with its heavy silence and treacherous shadows, seemed to hide something more, something beyond what ordinary eyes could see. Deep down, I knew that by following this path, there would be no turning back. The decision was made. At dawn, I would search for the lost temple, and who knows, maybe I would be more than just a victim of an old story. Perhaps I would be the next to uncover the mysteries of Medusa, or perhaps I would be the next to never return. The next morning, I took my boat and headed toward the distant shore where the old fisherman had told me about the temple. The waves were calm, as if the sea were in a deep sleep, but a thick fog enveloped the horizon, making the scene even more mysterious and eerie. The wind, which had previously been just a gentle breeze, now seemed to whisper secrets I didn't want to hear. The sound of the waves was muffled by the thickness of the mist, creating an unsettling silence. Each stroke of the oar seemed to take me deeper into an unknown place, and with each pull of the oar, a growing weight formed in my chest, as if the island were calling me to something beyond my understanding. As I neared the shore, the atmosphere grew heavier, as if the very air was charged with a dense and uncomfortable energy. The fog seemed to close around the boat, enveloping it completely, until the line between the sky and the sea vanished, and I found myself isolated, trapped in a world of shadows and mist. The island ahead was barely visible, its rocky forms and twisted trees emerging from the fog in a spectral manner, as if they were rising from a nightmare. The feeling that something was wrong grew with each stroke I took. The calmness of the sea seemed to have disappeared, replaced by a palpable tension. Each wave that hit the hull of the boat sounded louder than it should have, and the silence between the crashes was interrupted by strange noises, snaps of breaking branches, as if something or someone was moving on the island, hidden from my sight. I tried to ignore the feelings that haunted me, convinced that it was all just my imagination, fueled by the old fisherman's story. But as I advanced, getting closer and closer to the shore, It was impossible to deny that an ancient and immense presence seemed to be watching me, waiting. When I finally stepped onto the cold sand of the island, the silence was absolute. The only sound breaking the stillness was the murmur of the wind, which seemed to whisper words I couldn't understand. The dense vegetation around me appeared even more wild, the trees with grotesque shapes twisting toward the sky like fingers of a monstrous hand. Each step I took toward the interior of the island felt as if I were being pulled by something invisible, a force that was not mine to control. And it was when I began to walk, guided by a sense that there was no turning back, that I realized something even more disturbing. The air seemed thicker, as if it were suffocating my lungs, and the feeling of being watched, as if invisible eyes were everywhere, became almost unbearable. The temple was there, somewhere ahead, and I knew that, once I found it, everything the old fisherman had told me would become real. I just didn't know yet the price I would have to pay for this discovery. When I finally disembarked, the terrain was barren and rocky. The sound of the sea, which had once seemed muffled by the fog, was now distant, almost unrecognizable. There were no signs of life, not even the song of a bird or the movement of a leaf in the wind. The landscape was desolate, dominated by broken stones and twisted trees rising like distorted shadows against the gray sky. The place had the appearance of something abandoned for centuries, forgotten by time and men. And then, as I advanced, the temple appeared before me, or what was left of it, an ancient, dilapidated structure, covered by a thick mantle of moss that had overtaken the stones, as if nature were trying to swallow everything that had been built there. The walls were worn, marked by erosion and a distant past that could no longer be unraveled. The temple, which once would have been grand, was now a skeleton of stone, its columns broken and its entrance hidden beneath thick vegetation. The air around me seemed even heavier, charged with a strange tension, as if the island itself were trying to push me away. I stopped before the entrance, my heart pounding harder. A chill ran down my spine, an unsettling feeling that I shouldn't be there, that some boundary was being crossed. Every step I took toward the temple seemed to pull me deeper into an abyss, a trap that I knew I was walking into. But pride and curiosity were stronger, driving me to continue. I needed to understand what lay behind that story, understand what the fisherman feared so much. The promise of answers, even if dangerous, was something I couldn't ignore. I crossed the broken entrance, feeling the air grow even denser as I ventured deeper. The darkness inside the temple was almost total, with only small openings in the walls allowing the weak morning light to timidly filter through. Each step echoed on the stones, a sound that seemed to reverberate throughout the place, as if the temple were alive, as if it were waiting for me. And amid the heavy silence, the feeling that something was watching me grew with each passing moment. The weight of the story, the power of the place, was more real than I had ever imagined. I pressed forward, driven by a mixture of fear and fascination. What I sought, what the fisherman spoke of in secret, seemed to be there, waiting to be discovered. And even knowing it might be too late, I continued my walk, not looking back, because somewhere, deep within my soul, I knew the answers were closer than I had imagined. As I entered the temple, the air was heavy, thick, as if every molecule was charged with something I couldn't comprehend. The silence was absolute, a silence that felt almost oppressive, as if the place had swallowed every sound that had ever existed there. Each step I took made the stones echo in an unsettling way, a muffled and distant sound, as if the temple itself were trying to absorb my presence, waiting for me to become just another visitor lost in its vastness. The temple was abandoned, but something there felt alive, as if the very place was waiting, anticipating the arrival of someone to reveal its darkest secrets. I could feel it in the walls, in the shadows that stretched and contracted, as if they were breathing to a rhythm of their own. The columns, worn by time, seemed to watch me with silent attention, as if the temple were an organism that recognized my presence. When my eyes finally adjusted to the darkness, I saw something that made me stop suddenly, my heart pounding harder in my chest. There were petrified figures scattered throughout the hall, men, women, even animals. They were frozen, motionless, as if time had stopped for all of them, leaving their lives suspended at the moment of transformation. But the most disturbing thing was not their immobility, but the expression on their faces. Each of these figures had an expression of terror, a deep, horrifying fear that seemed to have frozen their final moments of life. Their eyes, once full of life, were now empty, but something in them, something in the void of their gazes, made me feel an inexplicable agony. And then, it was when my eyes finally noticed the most terrifying thing of all. I saw the eyes. The fixed gaze of each of these statues seemed to follow me. It wasn't an empty gaze, but a conscious one, almost accusatory, as if each of them knew exactly who I was, as if they knew that somehow I had crossed a line that should not have been crossed. I felt small in front of those petrified figures, as if the temple itself was still guarded by something that didn't want me there. The silence grew even heavier, and the air seemed to grow denser, colder. I wanted to turn back, to flee, but something held me. Something inside me that I couldn't understand, forcing me to continue. I knew I shouldn't be there, but fear and curiosity, now intertwined, pushed me forward, deeper into the temple, where the answers, or my fate, awaited me. But as I moved forward, I felt that the statues, with their fixed gazes and petrified expressions, wouldn't let me leave until they had shown me what I had truly come to find. Suddenly, I felt a movement behind me. A shiver ran down my spine, and instinctively I turned around. In the darkest corner of the temple, where the light from the entrance could barely reach, there was a figure. I couldn't see it clearly, but the simple fact of knowing something was there, watching me, made my heart race. The figure was motionless, almost ethereal, as if it were part of the temple's very shadow. I couldn't make out any details, but I knew something was terribly wrong. The figure moved slowly, as if it were dragging itself through the space, almost without making a sound. The atmosphere was so quiet that every small noise seemed amplified, and the movement of the figure, silent and deliberate, seemed to scratch the stillness of the place in an agonizing way. I tried to step back, trying to stay calm, but fear held me in place, making it impossible to look away. Then something even more disturbing happened. The figure's hair began to move, as if it had a life of its own. I stood frozen, trying to comprehend what was happening, until, in a sudden and sharp motion, the hair rose, revealing what it really was. Snakes, living snakes, twisted, their scales glimmering in the weak light. But the most terrifying part was their eyes, golden, deathly eyes that seemed to glow with their own light, as if they were the very reflection of death itself. They fixed directly on me, and the sensation was as if my soul were being probed, slowly devoured by that penetrating gaze. The snakes writhed and thrashed, their movements quick and unpredictable, as if they were preparing to strike. The air around me seemed colder, denser, and an unbearable pressure surrounded me. I knew that, at that moment, something much larger than my understanding was before me. The figure in the corner was no longer human. Its form was becoming clearer, a creature that defied all logical explanations. A supernatural, immortal force that had remained hidden there, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. With each movement of the snakes, fear spread throughout my body, and the urge to flee grew stronger. But I couldn't move. I didn't know if it was terror or some kind of spell that kept me there, paralyzed, in front of what I was beginning to understand. The figure, with its golden eyes and serpents writhing on its head, took a step forward, and the tension in the air increased even more. The feeling that death, in its purest form, was there, ready to swallow me, became more and more real. Medusa. I knew at that moment that everything the old fisherman had said was real. She was there before me in flesh and bone, or at least something far worse. The snakes on her head writhed with a terrifying agility, her golden eyes glowing with immeasurable fury, as if terror itself had materialized in those funeral-like orbits. The air turned cold, a wave of deep chill that seemed to come from inside the temple, passing through my skin and into the marrow of my bones. My heart raced, the sound of its beats echoing in my ears like a war drum, signaling that the fight for survival had already begun. Before I could react, before any coherent thought could form, her eyes locked onto mine. The world around me fell silent, the kind of silence that precedes the end, an absolute void where there is no escape, no hope. It was as if time had stopped, as if the entire universe had aligned to witness my fate. I felt a weight in my chest, an overwhelming pressure, as if life itself were being sucked out of me. Fear was no longer just an emotion. It was tangible, something that clung to me, consumed me, making me feel weak, powerless. The sensation that everything I had been, everything I had known, was disappearing into a bottomless abyss took hold of me. But by a miracle, or perhaps by luck, I didn't look directly into her eyes. Something inside me, a primal instinct for survival, made me avert my gaze, even though my body trembled with fear. In a nearly desperate movement, I turned quickly, my heart nearly leaping from my chest. I ran toward the exit, not daring to look back, knowing that any hesitation could be the last thing I did. The sound of my feet echoed on the stones, but the silence around me was deafening, as if the temple itself was waiting for me to be just another to fall into its trap. I dared not stop, dared not take a deep breath, fearing that any movement would be enough to bring the fury of that creature upon me. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, my legs almost refusing to obey me, but I kept going, running as I had never run before, fleeing from the death that followed me with every step. The temple seemed to stretch, the entrance receding as if the very place wanted to swallow me whole. I didn't know how much more I could endure, but the thought that she was still there, waiting, gave me the strength to continue. When I finally reached the boat and jumped into it, the relief did not come. The sea was calm again, but the feeling that something was watching me, something that was no longer human, stayed with me. The nightmare, that golden and funeral gaze, would not let me go so easily. And as I looked back, although the temple was now far away, I knew something had changed forever. The fear of Medusa was not only in the stones of that place, but in my very being, trapped in my mind, like a shadow that would never leave me. That place left its mark on me. I escaped, but something inside me was never the same again. The experience, the presence of Medusa, was etched into my soul like a scar that will never heal. I returned to my village with a weary body and a dazed mind, but the true weight was not in my tired legs or dry throat. It was in what I had seen, in what I had felt. When I finally found the strength to tell someone what had happened, my words were met with skepticism and nervous laughter. The story of Medusa was just a legend after all, just a tale created to scare children, something far removed from reality. But what I saw there, in that abandoned temple, was real. The statues with their fixed eyes, the penetrating and accusatory gaze, the snakes that moved as if they had a life of their own. All of that still lingers in my mind, an eternal memory that haunts me in the quietest hours. Even after everything, I can still feel the weight of those petrified figures, as if they weren't just watching but waiting for me. I was no longer just dealing with a legend, but with something much older and realer than any story told around a campfire. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can hear the hiss of the snakes, a subtle sound that seems to seep into my memories, like an echo coming from somewhere deep and dark. Sometimes the cold I felt in the temple returns, a chilling sensation that spreads across my skin, and the fear, that primal fear, resurfaces, consuming me. I know, with a certainty that not even time can erase, that if I return to that temple, I won't be as fortunate next time. The luck that allowed me to escape the first time would run out, and the price I would pay would be much higher. Medusa does not forgive. She waits, patient, and deep down, I know the only reason I'm still alive is because she let me go. For now. And so, every day, I wonder if the escape really happened, or if it was all just a distorted vision, an illusion created by fear. But deep inside, I know, what I saw was real. What I experienced was real. And with that, the weight of the truth grows heavier, a truth that will follow me to the end of my days. Medusa is there, waiting. She does not rush, for time does not affect her the same way it affects us. She waits patiently, with the calm of one who knows that her vengeance is eternal, a punishment that will never find an end. Waiting for the one who, in their foolishness, dares to look directly into her eyes. the gaze that petrifies, that steals life and turns everything it touches into stone, an eternal and silent prison. The one who challenges her power will be immortalized, not in flesh, but in a form that will never again know the warmth of the sun or the freedom of movement. And no matter how much we try to ignore the truth, it is lurking, hidden in the shadows of time, waiting for the right moment to reveal its presence. There is no place she cannot reach, no hiding place safe from her gaze. The legends may try to minimize the fear, the stories may downplay the gravity of her existence, but the reality of Medusa remains untamable. She is not just a monster of the past, she is a force that is still alive, still feeling the pain and rage of a forgotten time. Her vengeance will not cease as long as there is anyone who dares to disrespect her story, her pain. And so, like a shadow, she remains, waiting, watching, ready to turn anyone who comes near into stone so that her vengeance may never cease. Whoever approaches her domain, whether out of curiosity or boldness, is already marked, and their fate is sealed by the fatal gaze of the creature who, even after millennia, still holds her absolute power over what remains of the world. She is there, waiting, immortal, eternal, while the world marches on, unaware of what lurks in the darkness. If you ever hear of the Lost Temple, the Forgotten Island, remember this. There is a reason why it remains hidden. Time has not erased it, nor has darkness concealed it. It remains there, silent, waiting, awaiting the one who dares to disrespect the secret it holds. The island and the temple may have disappeared from the map, but not from memory, and no matter how many brave hearts seek to find them, the truth of what resides there remains veiled, like a curse that never lifts. And if by chance you lose yourself in the mist and discover the path to the temple, know that curiosity comes at a high price, and the gaze you seek may be the last one you ever see. Do not look into her eyes, even if your courage is strong, stronger than any fear you have ever faced. Medusa never forgets. What you find there will not just be a story or a monster from mythology, but a vengeance that transcends time. Those petrified statues, the bodies frozen in an expression of eternal terror, are merely the reflection of what happens when someone dares to face the creature that inhabits that place. Medusa does not forgive. She does not just petrify the body, she rips the very essence of life from every being who dares to challenge her gaze. And once Medusa's eyes lock onto you, there is a weight, a pressure that goes beyond the physical. It's the weight of her history, her pain, the vengeance that stretches across generations. No matter how many warriors or adventurers have tried, none of them have emerged unscathed because she waits, silent and patient, until someone falls into her trap. Do not let your bravery or recklessness blind you. If you find the Forgotten Island, if you reach the Lost Temple, remember, the real danger is not in what you see, but in what you must never look at. Medusa lurks, and the only way to escape her wrath is to keep your eyes away from hers.